All right, it's go time. Welcome to Dynasty 365 podcast, the Dynasty Fantasy Football podcast of fantasyandframes.com, part of the Fantasy and Frames podcast network, which is part of the ever-growing Fantasy and Frames fantasy empire. I'm Brian Ford. My usual my usual co-host, Tyler Heil, is not here tonight. Had some other obligations to get to, but El Jefe, the CEO, is my guest co-host tonight. Jorge, how you doing?
I feel so strange being on a different podcast than Fourth and Frames. This is crazy. I don't you know that scene in Talladega Nights where Ricky Bobby's getting interviewed and he's holding up his hands and
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with my hands. This is exactly what I'm feeling like right now. So happy to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Right on, and it's a good night for you to fill in. Because we just happen to be talking about IDP tonight. We've been doing some stuff with rookies, mostly offensive rookies, and we're going to dedicate this episode to IDP rookies. And to that end, we have our guest tonight, Hollywood Titan. How you doing?
Doing pretty good, fellas. Thanks for having me on.
Right on. We're really glad you're here. I know Jorge probably knows a little bit more about IDP than I do, but I know myself and some listeners might first be getting into this sort of thing, and so it's good to have some experts on with us, and that's why you're here. So before we get into any of the actual rookies, let's get to know Hollywood a little bit. So why did you get into IDP, and why do you love it so much? What keeps you coming back?
Oh man, it's been a few years ago, but been a long time fantasy football activist, and I was like, I'm a huge defensive guy because that's what I played in high school and stuff. So I was like, man, there's got to be more to this. And one day I just kind of happened to, I think it was ESPN or NFL.com. I don't even remember. And I was like, oh, there's defensive players. And I tried just I guess like your basic league, one defensive lineman, one linebacker, one defensive back. And I was like, I'll try it out. And I tried it for a year, and I was like, I was hooked. I was like, man, if I could field a whole full side of defense, this would be awesome. And I started looking, and I never looked back, man.
Right on. Yeah. That's kind of how I feel with Dynasty in general. And I've now sort of gotten bit by a couple other bugs like C2C and Devi. So, yeah, it's just kind of get into it, and you just get hooked. So where can people find you and your work? Let's get to know you now as a content creator. What are you into these days?
Yeah, so most people know me through IDP side of the ball. I mean, we do cover offense and stuff, but most people know me through IDP Nation podcast. That's the big thing. We've got the Devi IDP Grind podcast now, which is IDP Devi for college, your campus to Kent stuff. And just recently, like I was telling you guys before we jumped on, we now have an IDPNation.com page, which will take you straight to our podcast page. There's articles, all of our podcasts, all that good stuff. Actually, the link to this show right now is up on there. Click on articles, guest appearances. It's up. So you can go back and watch this later if you're not watching it live. We're just kind of getting started with the podcast page, and we got all kinds of good stuff coming. So, yeah. And then, like I said, you can find me on Twitter, Hollywood Titan. You can basically find me anywhere. If you can't find me, just ask somebody. They'll point you in the right direction.
All right. So maybe Jorge, you can tag on this too.
Sure.
What makes the process of evaluating and ranking IDP players different from, say, offensive players, or is it really all that different?
So I think everyone's process, just like on offense, is different. Obviously, you're talking your redraft rankings versus your dynasty rankings. So you have to take, how many years have they been playing, how many years they potentially have left, the whole age aspect of it, the opportunity aspect of it plays a big role here. For redraft, opportunity, snap percentage, snap share, that kind of thing plays a big role into how high you're ranking these guys. But for me personally, I always like to try my best to draw a comparison to players on offense whenever I'm talking about IDP players, because, one of the things that a lot of people who don't play IDP don't realize is like, well, okay, well, I have this IDP player, but I'm trying to make a trade in my league for this wide receiver, but I don't know whether or not I should, submit the trade because I don't know whether or not it's a fair trade or not, and that's where, I feel like I come in and I'm like, okay, well, let me see how they're doing fantasy-wise. Let's see the output. Let's see this fantasy points output. Okay, are they kind of comparable to each other? Are they consistent enough with each other? Okay, well, then now we can start drawing some comparisons. So by looking at the output of the players on offense compared to the ones on defense, I'm able to kind of like assess my rankings from that point forward.
Okay. Khalil, what about you? What's your process for these IDP rookies? And is it any different from when you're looking at offensive players?
It's really kind of not. I mean, it's all about kind of just like Jorge said. It's kind of I think people kind of get overwhelmed because they don't know a lot about IDP, so they think it's really harder than what it actually is. But I'm like Jorge. I'm kind of balancing it out. Where does, just in general, where does a Kayvon Thibodeaux stack up against a Breece Hall? And it's the same rookies aside. It's the same with the NFL side. Where does a Devin White or a Roquan Smith stack up against a Christian McCaffrey or an Aaron Rodgers? So it's all about the scoring, of course, but learning those values, player versus player values, offense versus defense. And to this day, that's one of the biggest issues, especially for newbies or novice type IDP players. They don't know how to value IDP versus the offense. And my suggestion is look at your scoring and see where they stack up. Go last year and see where your top defensive players stacked up against offense and who he was comparable to, and then you can kind of go from there. So, but it's really not that hard. It's just kind of just looking over your scoring and looking at the rankings.
Okay. All right. So sounds about the same. So one more comparison question for you, Hollywood. On offense, generally, it's said that it's easier for sort of running backs to jump in and produce early as opposed to, say, wide receivers, right? Is there a position on IDP side where, I don't know, maybe it's easier for a rookie to start producing at safety than it is at middle linebacker, or is it not like that?
Yeah, I would think your linebackers and safeties are kind of your easier players to get on the field. Your defensive ends, your corners, your defensive tackles, especially if you're in position-specific leagues. It's a little harder for them to get on there. Mm-hmm. The thing with linebackers, it's just such a deep position that it kind of limits the value of some of your rookies coming in. And it depends on the team and the situation, just like on offense and all that. So if you can get like a Kyle Hamilton, and I know we'll get into this a little bit, but like the IDP rookie Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame, super high floor, but I think his ceiling's even higher. So that's a player, I would target everywhere because that's a premium position that scores a lot of points in just about every league, whether it's position specific or not. And, with that high floor, you can kind of, it's a safe option. You're not going to get burn out right there, or lose out.
Okay. All right. I dig it. I want to say hi to Corey.
What up,
looks
Corey?
like coming in from YouTube. Good to see you. Thanks for joining.
What's up, Corey?
So we're going to get into some positions here. But before that, maybe an overview of the 2022 class. When we have people on about the offensive rookies, we kind of what's your impression of the class? And on the offensive side, the story is that, between 2021 and 2023, this is a down class on offense. What are your impressions overall of the 22 class? And then after Hollywood, Jorge, you tell me what you think too.
Okay.
And I guess we're talking defensively, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's got some heavy hitters up at the top. There's I I would venture to say there's at least 5-6 heavy hitters, depending on what type of league you're in, positions or whatever. But there's 5 or 6 real heavy hitters, and then there's some solid options behind that. So it's a pretty good class, and there's going to be some contributors right away, depending on where they go and what team they land with. But
Wait, what about you? What do you think of the 2022 class?
The first thing that jumps out whenever I'm looking at mocks on the various NFL channels or ESPN channels or whatever platform you go to look at, stuff like that, the abundance of edge rusher, it's crazy. I think we saw the past couple seasons, especially like, for example, in the Super Bowl with Tampa Bay and those edge rushers getting after Patrick Mahomes and that putrid offensive line for the Chiefs 2 seasons ago. You look at what the Bengals were able to do this past year. Their front seven, those ends, Hubbard and Hendrickson are no joke. They kept them in the Super Bowl for a large portion of the game. Getting to the quarterback, getting that pressure there is a huge asset when going against potent offenses. And let's look what's happened in free agency so far. Let's talk about Khalil Mack going over to the Chargers. Let's talk about Chandler Jones going to Vegas, opposite Max Crosby. Going back to the Chargers, you got Bosa and you got Khalil Mack. Just a lot of moves on defense that are edge rusher centric, and you're seeing a lot of these top names, repeated over and over again in terms of rookie prospects, because I think teams are realizing, look, with all the potent offenses that are in the league, we need to be able to shut them down, and that starts with getting to the quarterback.
Yeah, right on. Yep. All right, so you know what? Let's dig in then. Let's take a look at Hollywood's top 3 with defensive end edge rusher. Who comes up as your top 3, the big names to look for?
Yeah, I mean, Jorge kind of hit on it a little bit. This class is really deep on defensive end or edge rusher. Probably more so than maybe the past few years. I think your top for me, my top 3 is Thibodeaux, Hutchison, and Jermaine Johnson. So Kayvon Thibodeaux from Oregon, Aiden Hutchison from Michigan, and Jermaine Johnson from Florida State. That's the 3 top defensive ends and 3 top edge rushers I have in this class. Depending on who you ask, Thibodeaux and Hutchison are kind of 1-2 flip-flopping. Most people would tell you Hutchison, and it's hard to argue that with the performance he put on in the playoffs. I think Thibodeaux had a little bit of a down year, but I've been watching this kid since he was like a junior in high school, and he's got better every year. And sky is the limit for him. It really is.
But before we get going, Corey's got a question for us over on YouTube.
Okay.
And Hollywood, let's have you take this one. I'm in a 14 team. Exactly. I'm in a 14 team, half PPR, 1 quarterback dynasty league. In last year's draft, I spent my second half of the draft getting Parsons, David Collins, Gregory Rousseau, and Kwity Paye. Our lineup has 2 edge, linebacker, and defensive linemen. Do I move on from Collins if I have Queen and Murray, Patrick Queen and Murray? Kenneth Murray from
Kenneth Murray for the Chargers.
Chargers, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Yeah,
man,
you go first. And then
I was such a huge Collins fan, and what I've got invested in him, I've kind of got to hold on to him. And with Hicks out of the picture, you got to think that Simmons and Collins are going to get the run this year for sure.
Right.
I don't know that I move on from Collins. I think I keep him and I move Patrick Queen. Kind of the same scenario, but the difference is Collins really hasn't been on the field to show whether he can do it or not. Queen has, and he's kind of disappointed the past year. So if I'm moving somebody, I think I'm going to move Queen and get what I can for him.
I 100% agree with everything you just said about Patrick Queen. You look at this guy who's supposed to be the middle linebacker job. Well, he lost that job to like quit Chris Bynes or whatever Chris Bynes over in Baltimore.
Yes.
For a good chunk of the season. You look at some of the advanced stats, one that just happens to stick out in my mind, because I read about it recently, is his missed tackle rate. Like this guy was just missing tackles more than he was making them. And
which is surprising to me, really. It
right.
really is.
And one of the things you could say is his ability to get to the quarterback actually and applying pressure, that actually got better. But for IDP purposes, you're not using this linebacker to be the edge rusher. You're you're using this guy to be a tackle machine.
Right.
You talk about Zaven Collins. They did pick up Nick Vigil today. I don't know what that sends up red flags for Collins or sends up red flags for Simmons. I would like to think the former with Collins, but I don't know right off the top of my head what that does. As far as Kenneth Murray for the Chargers, I am not a fan. I just think injuries and just lack of performance, aka poor performance. It's just been.
Yeah, I think Murray's kind of lower down the totem pole than Collins and Queen. So I think, you probably don't have as much invested in him as you do the other two. And like I said, Collins is still unproven, while Queen is kind of he's kind of disappointed. So I think if you can find somebody that needs a linebacker that kind of still believes in him, he's the guy you move. Collins was a rookie last year. So, we saw the same thing with Simmons as a rookie. He didn't do a whole lot as a rookie, right? So I think there's still some hope there until I see him get on the field and just fail. Right. I think the value is still there. I would move Queen. I've actually tried to move Queen in a couple places. So, who knows what they do in the draft, but if I can get something for Queen and move him, I think that's the play.
All right. And before we get, I'm sorry, one more from Corey.
So Corey was just mentioning that Kenneth Murray, he picked up off waiver, so he does no real.
So, that's perfect. With what you've got invested with Queen, you pick up Murray off waivers. It's not costing you anything, right? Price of a mouse click, as Johnny the Greek would say, my good buddy. So, it's not costing you anything. So, of course, you're going to keep him and see. I would move Queen and see what I could get.
Yep.
Okay. And before we get to linebackers with the rookies, just one more question from me, at least, about the defensive end and the edge guys. What I've seen in a couple mocks that I looked at is that Trayvon Walker is rising up and was mocked in front of Jermaine Johnson in a couple mocks I saw. What do you think of Trayvon Walker?
He's a fast riser. That performance he put on at the combine was something else. And there's a lot of teams, a lot of scouts. They put a lot of their eggs in to that basket. Have bigger, faster, stronger. I'm a big film guy myself, so I use the combine and pro days and stuff like that. I use that as confirming stuff to go back and check tape. But he's a good player, but Georgia was just so freaking loaded defensively. It's hard to say which guy made who better, right?
Okay.
I like Trayvon Walker. I think he's, soon as the season ended, I made a list. I thought he was probably out of my top 25. And as we went from the end of the season, national championship through now, he's actually in my top 25, and I think he could rise a little faster. So it's going to depend on where he lands, as always. But yeah, I think he's definitely one you can. If you can't get one of the big three, he's one I'm targeting for sure later.
Okay, I dig it. Let's move on to linebacker. Then we were just talking about linebackers with Corey's questions. So the first thing I saw with linebackers when I was looking at some of these rankings and these mocks is that linebacker is a deep position, but I didn't see anybody get mocked above like maybe 16 in the first round, And the top guy I saw most recently was Devin Lloyd. So you tell me who your top 3 rookie linebackers are.
I'll tell you Nakobe Dean is probably the consensus number one, but my number one is Devin Lloyd. I think he's the most complete overall linebacker in this class. Now, a lot of people will argue with me on that, and I'm not going to fault him because Dean he's pretty dang good. I have Lloyd as my top linebacker, Dean as number two, and then I have Christian Harris from Alabama as my third linebacker in this class.
Okay. And anything stand out to you about any of those three as far as floor versus ceiling or landing spot dependent or any other things that we talk about?
I mean, you can always go landing spot dependent, right? I mean, we can always kind of talk that scheme, all that. Mm-hmm. I think, to me, from what I've seen, what I've watched, and I'm a big SEC guy because I'm a Vol fan, so don't hold that against me. But I think Devin Lloyd's the best linebacker in this class. Overall, pass rushing, ability to drop in coverage, do everything. Now, like I said, a lot of people will say Nakobe Dean. I'm not going to fault him, but I just think Devin Lloyd is more of your NFL top linebacker. Dean's a little bit undersized. And again, he's surrounded so much good talent. Mm-hmm. So you kind of got to judge that. I mean, not saying he's not good, but when you're on a defense like Georgia had last year,
right?
Throw a dart, pick a player. They were good. So, moving on without all that help, it'll be interesting to see. But I think Dean's a close second, and then Christian Harris, I think he's easily the third. And then after that, there's a group of guys that could challenge for that fourth, fifth, sixth spot. But yeah, those are my top three right now.
Okay. So I have one specific linebacker question, but I need to digress a little bit here. You're a Vols fan, right? Have you ever heard?
Oh, here it comes.
No. This is probably not the question you were expecting. Have you ever heard of the band Fish?
I have.
Okay, they're my favorite band. I've seen them like over 200 times. Right? They do a cover. They do a cover of Rocky Top, and they use it for an encore a lot. And it's the first, and that's how I learned what Rocky Top was before I even knew it was related to Tennessee. So go check out Fish doing Rocky Top on YouTube.
Oh yeah, love it. Love any version of Rocky Top. That's some smart guys that'll sing Rocky Top.
Yeah. Jorge, any insights on linebackers?
I'm looking at you mentioned him being your number two linebacker in this draft class, Nakobe Dean. And I'm just looking around like the landscape of, where these, inside linebackers, middle linebackers could be going. And Daniel Jeremiah over at NFL, he had him mocked at 24 going to Dallas, taking over a middle and kind of freeing up Parsons to go to, to edge. And so my initial thought here was, okay, but didn't they just invest in a linebacker last year out of LSU in the later rounds that people were pretty high on?
Jabril Cox.
Yeah, Jabril Cox, exactly. So that kind of makes me kind of curious as to what their thoughts on Jabril Cox is referring to Daniel Jeremiah. But now today they re-signed the Cowboys. It is Van Der Esch to a 1-year deal, $2 million, 1.75 guaranteed. So good for him for getting a majority of that money.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no. So I'm kind of curious as to what Nakobe Dean's some of the popular things people like to say about him is that he's a very intelligent linebacker. He can get in there. He can control the defense. He can tell you where everybody's supposed to go or the line, which is great, right? But you look at some of these landing spots they have him going to, whether it's Dallas. I'm like, okay, well they already had some smart guys there. You go to Miami. That's another one that they're saying there. I'm like, okay, well there's still some smart guys there too. So it makes me wonder, is his skill set of being a cerebral leader on the field needed, quote unquote? But like you said, the big concern here is look, how much of it was situation for him in college versus him actually being able to produce by himself on the real thing, on the real NFL level. I love your pick of Lloyd as the first one. That's pretty solid.
Yeah, he's just a dog. I mean, go back and watch his tape. He was, for Utah, man, he was all over the daggone field for them. I mean, if you can get that at the NFL level,
right,
it's going to be something.
So I have a speaking of a guy from Georgia, and they were loaded. I see that a fellow by the name of Kway Walker is ranked similarly to a fifth-year senior from Montana State named Troy Anderson, right? So if I'm on I usually look at the offensive side of the ball. When I see like fifth-year senior, small school, I'm saying, if in a tiebreaker, I'm taking the other guy. Any thoughts there on those two? I know they're not necessarily maybe highly ranked, but it sort of stood out to me as pretty curious.
Yeah, I mean, Kway Walker, of course, playing SEC, that's as good as you can get, right, in college.
Mm-hmm.
So he's proven against top talent because the SEC we all know that. They freaking dominate the college landscape and they dominate the draft. So, I mean, in that aspect, he's proven. I like it. Troy Anderson, I mean, a really good player. I like him, knew who he was, thought he was good. And even I didn't think he would test as good as he did at the combine, but those combine numbers, especially that 40 time, that sent his stock skyrocketing. Went back and looked at some more tape, and he's pretty legit. I mean, it's a big jump from Division II to the NFL. I mean, that's a legit concern. Some people will say, and I hate comparisons, I really do, but some people will say, well, Logan Wilson went from Wyoming last year or a couple of years ago, he made the jump. So I get it. I mean, I'm not saying you can't, but I'm like you, the proven record against SEC versus kind of the secondary jump from Division II to the NFL, that's a big concern. Testing-wise, he's off the charts. I do think going back and looking at his tape, he's going to be a valuable option. I actually have him, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I would probably have him as my 6th linebacker right now in this class.
Okay.
So.
All right. And one more linebacker question. Speaking of Wyoming linebackers, and I'm just going to do this just to impress my boss that I did IDP research. Another guy I see ranked up there with the big school guys is middle linebacker Chad Mumma from Wyoming.
Sure.
What do we think of him?
Love him. I actually have him just behind Christian Harris.
Okay.
That dude is he's legit. Tested good at the combine, tackling machine at Wyoming. Of course, kind of like you see with Troy Anderson, didn't play the best of competition, but he was just a step above. But man, there's not much he can't do. So yeah, I think there's 3 there. There's 3 right there for me: Chad Mumma, Troy Anderson, and then I'm going to throw Leo Chenal, the linebacker from Wisconsin. I think those 3 are fighting for 4, 5, and 6.
Okay. All right, let's move to DBs. Let's do cornerback first. A couple of people stood out to me as when I was looking at mocks. And one of them I have a question about when it comes to competition. So I want to see where you rank him first. So tell me who your top 3 cornerbacks are.
Top 3 corners. Okay, so I'm going to go Derek Stingley Jr., LSU. Then I'm going to go Ahmad Sauce Gardner from Cincinnati. And then I'm going to go Trent McDuffie, the corner from Washington, as my top 3.
Okay. Jorge, what do you think about those?
I want to learn more about those.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we're playing in general leagues, you're probably not looking at any of those 3 because if you're in a general league, you're looking at safeties, right?
Okay.
But if you're forced to start a corner or a position-specific league, then yeah, that's my top 3. Stingley was kind of injured, missed all of last year, but the year before, man, there was no question about it. He was probably the best corner in the country. Unfortunately, he had to miss a lot of games or most of the season this year, so I still think he's the best corner in the country. Sauce Gardner, Cincinnati, he's going to get knocked. Well, they didn't play the best of competition.
That was my question. Yeah.
But you know what? Go back 2 years ago, they played Georgia in the national championship, and he held his own. They played Notre Dame this year and beat them. He held his own. So he's played some big-time competition, maybe not consistently, but he's played them and performed well. So he's probably easily my number 2. And then Trent McDuffie, he's just a dog out there in Washington. Good all-around corner. Probably not on the level of Stingley or Gardner, but has definitely separated himself as the number 3 corner.
Okay.
So I have a question, and maybe because I'd love to get your take on this. You mentioned, cornerback is not exactly the first type of position you're targeting in an IDP spot. If you just have a basic defensive back position, right? You're going safety, strong safety. What would landing spot kind of be the only thing that would sway you to potentially insert a cornerback into your starting defensive back spot? And let me just say, like, for example, if you were sliding one of these rookie cornerbacks in for a team that's just really bad, that the defense is going to be on the field a lot, and the opportunity that being on the snaps that you're going to get on defense just because the offense can't stay on the field, therefore you have more opportunity to make plays. Is that kind of a saving grace for cornerbacks, or is it really, you have to have, or conversely, do you need to go after those cornerbacks who have like a high tackle volume, who are maybe giving up too many passes in college? But not to the point where they're not draftable, right? But these cornerbacks who are targeted often by opposing quarterbacks in the in the collegiate ranks, and then they go to the pros, and you see for a couple of weeks, okay, well, these guys are getting targeted a lot. Is that kind of the rationale you could make as a fantasy manager to say I can insert a cornerback here in my DB spot, or is it really hard to make that argument?
Corner may be the most difficult position to pick in fantasy football, period, in my opinion. Most people will tell you stream it week to week, every week, all day long. On the NFL side, there is a few that I will take every time, aka Marcus Peters, because I know he's always going to get you a ton of interceptions. He's always going to get you a ton of pass breakups. He's always going to get you a bunch of return yards. Okay. So he's one guy, he's getting older, but that don't bother me. I know what he gives me. For rookies, it's a little bit different. In college, if you're playing Devy, you don't really want players that are getting roasted each week because they're probably not putting up very good numbers.
Probably, that's a good point.
So, if you're playing college or campus to Canton, you definitely want the good guys. Now, once they get to the NFL, I think you still want them because it's widely known good NFL teams with good quarterbacks. You roll a rookie out there at corner, and what's the first thing they're doing? Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, those guys. I mean, even down to Matt Ryan's, your second and third tier quarter, it's widely known. What are they doing when a cornerback's, especially early?
They go after them.
They're going to target their ass like there's no tomorrow, right? A few years ago, Byron Murphy, loved the kid for Arizona, and he got targeted on the regular. But he's kind of stepped up to the plate. I mean, he made a lot of plays. He gave up a lot of plays, but he made a lot of plays. Streaming is the option on the NFL side, and most people would do that, play the matchups week to week. Like I said, if you've got a Marcus Peters, like a Byron Murphy, I like him. I will say this, something that changed this year for me a little bit is the New York Jets, Robert Sala. He come in, and what did he do? He played every rookie he had. Brandon Eccles, you name it, from defensive tackle to safety, he played his rookies high volume, right? And they were getting roasted each week. So And I think you can kind of see some of the same thing again this year. They're going to get roasted again until they can get those players, until they can get the level of depth that they need. I think they're going to have some issues there. But Brandon Echols for the Jets, he did, considering what he was facing, he held his own pretty well. So most people would tell you to stream it. I think there's a few corners out there that you can, of course, if you're getting a Deion Sanders top player, they're just not going to throw it in, right? So he's really kind of invaluable. But I guess you kind of want to hit those guys that are just good enough to be shut down guys, but are going to make mistakes.
Okay.
Kind of a Malcolm Butler type in a way,
Gotcha.
All right. So let's round the rookies out with safety. A couple names that I see as sort of a contrast. Before I get to that, why don't you tell me who you're looking at safety? Who are your top three?
So my top safety has not wavered at all since the beginning of the college football season, and that's Kyle Hamilton. That dude is a freaking baller. The things he does on a football field at his size, he should not be doing. That big, running that fast, hitting that hard. I've seen him come from the far hash all the way across the field and make an interception, and he had no business making that pick, and he did it. He'll play down in the box, hit you like a linebacker. Like I said earlier, probably the safest floor of any rookie in this draft class. And his ceiling is probably just as high. Kind of go back. Thibodeaux, Hutchison, Hamilton, top three, and I would interchange those three. If you told me either one of them was 1, 2, 3 in any order, I wouldn't argue. I think those three are that good. As Jorge said, pass rush is the thing now, right? So I expect Hutchison or Thibodeaux. Probably, if I'm guessing, it's going to go Hutchison, Thibodeaux, Hamilton to be the first three off the board in the draft in that order. Don't know what team, but I would imagine that's the first three. Safe or fantasy-wise, I think if you're looking for a safety or a safe pick, no pun intended, I think Hamilton's your guy. I think wherever he goes and whoever drafts him is friction to probably get the best player IDP-wise in this freaking class.
Interesting. Okay, so I've heard that his running slow at the combine might make him slip in the NFL draft. Does that doesn't affect his ranking as opposed to the other safeties?
I've been watching this kid for 2-3 years, and see, people get caught up. Well, this is my thought. People get caught up on combine numbers, right?
Yeah.
Bigger, faster, stronger. What can you do? Go watch his film. Go watch some of his film. This kid, I promise you, is faster game speed than what he ran combine speed.
Okay. All right. And how about I'm going to mispronounce this name because I don't watch enough college football. Louis Cine?
Louis Cine.
Cine. Oh, there you go. Neither of them. All right.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Actually, he's my third safety.
Okay.
I think Jaquan Brisker from Penn State is number 2. But Cine is a guy that's between now and the start of the season could easily be my number 2 safety. He kind of got overlooked a couple years ago with Richard LeCounte down there in Georgia. But you go back last year, man, Cine, he will light you up like a Christmas tree. If he can square you up and get a shot on you, you better have your head on a swivel because he's going to knock your block off.
Okay. So, I think we've gotten the listeners some really good information as they enter their IDP rookie drafts, or rookie drafts that include IDP, I should say. Jorge, any last questions for Hollywood?
Let's say you're in a 5-round rookie draft. Let's say you're in a 5-round rookie IDP league. Let's say it's IDP only. Okay, let's just go with that one.
Okay.
Does the overabundance of edge rusher in this class make you want to kind of like pivot to other positions and kind of take their top, players. I'll give you an example. So you have like Thibodeaux going, and all the other edge rushers we were discussing earlier. And let's say they're just coming off the board. Do you keep riding that train because of the depth at edge rusher this season? Or do you maybe just say, screw it, I'll go get a Kyle Hamilton because he's the best player on the board versus going for the best position overall in the draft?
This draft class is pretty deep as far as defensive ends, edge rusher. For me right now, and I'm kind of looking down my list here, I will single out 3 for sure: Hamilton, Thibodeaux, and Hutchison. Mm-hmm. Any order I want to get them. If I can get one of those big 3, I'm taking them, period. Gotcha. I think after that, you've got play, depending on what type of league you're in, position specific. Right. But I'm taking a Devin Lloyd, Jermaine Johnson, Nakobe Dean, Christian Harris, Chad Mumma, and Jordan Davis. If you're in a position specific league, Jordan Davis is a guy you better get. And then Chenal and Anderson. There's about 5 or 6 right there in that second group I'm taking. Then after that, I'm just kind of mixing and matching, maybe, kind of depending on what my roster looks like, what I kind of need. And I think fantasy in general, over the last year or so, it's kind of hard to say that, well, I'm taking running back first or I'm taking linebacker first, no matter what. I think it's kind of fantasy football, especially Dynasty. Redraft is a whole different story, but Dynasty is stuff like that, Campus to Cantons. You are actually getting more roster inclusive, dependent what your needs are, what you're looking for, what you have. I think there's probably, I'd say there's a good 10 that I would look at. Then after that, it's a crapshoot, more or less.
Gotcha.
But those first 3, Hamilton, Thibodeaux, and Hutchison, yeah, I'm all in.
Right on. All right. That's the big 3. So let's land the plane. Hollywood, one more time. Give folks the plugs. Where can they find you and your work?
Yes, IDP Nation podcast, IDP Grind podcast, idpnation.com, and that will take you to our pod page. Get all of our episodes. We got articles going up now. You can support us, PayPal, all that, rate and review, all that good stuff. Find me on at Hollywood Titan on Twitter. If you're on Reddit, I'm King Titan 1. I'm everywhere. Just ask somebody that can point you in the right direction.
Right on. So you can find me at ffjunkie_ on Twitter. My articles and rankings on fantasyandframes.com. Speaking of fantasyandframes.com, Jorge, what do we have going on there?
So we just wrapped up our Dynasty Risers and Fallers article series, as well as podcasts / video episodes here at fantasyandframes.com. We take you from offense to quarterback, running back, tight end, wide receiver, all the way through the IDP positions of defensive lineman, linebacker, and defensive back. Coming up soon, we're going to be having our Dynasty Target articles come out, as well as the corresponding podcasts for that. So stay tuned for that. Of course, our flagship podcast, Fourth and Frames, you can find normally every Wednesday going forward. But I think for the next couple weeks, we're going to be featuring Dynasty 365 a little bit more. You got, a lot of content coming up for the NFL draft. So we're looking forward to what you and Tyler and the rest of the crew do here at Fantasy and Frames for the Dynasty coverage and the rookie prospect coverage. And then before you know it, Fourth and Frames will be back. And then Nate and I will be starting our IDP podcast called Shoot the Gap. That'll be starting after the NFL draft. So, we got Dynasty targets, we got rookie profiles, we got, after that's done, we have landing spot analysis. I mean, after that's done, meaning the NFL draft. So we're in full swing in Dynasty mode, covering both sides of the ball because you know what? You like watching both sides of the ball on Sunday. Why not watch it on your phone or your computer when you're looking at your fantasy scores?
All right. And you can keep track of all that by following on Twitter at FIF Pod Network. And so for Hollywood and for El Jefe CEO Jorge, I'm Brian. Thanks for listening, watching. Have a good one, folks.